Make it plain.
Make it plain.
M.I.P.
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make it plain.
Get woke.
God bless you. Get woke. Folks, MIP is now COVID-free, meaning free to all subscribers as we navigate this pandemic. We're thinking about everyone, and we've got to get through this together. So for a limited time, no fee to subscribe to Make It Plain on your favorite podcast app. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, it is Thursday, and you know what that means. Normally, DailyKos would feature the founder of the largest online progressive community, Marcos Malitzis, but Marcus is on vacay for a couple of weeks, which is kind of cool because it gives us another opportunity to talk to others in the DailyKos community. So, of course, I'm Mark. Normally we talk to Marcos. We're going to keep it in the MARK family. And happy to hear today from Mark Sumner, who not only is a member of the DailyKos staff, he's the author of several pieces of nonfiction and fiction. The Evolution of Everything is nonfiction, and a novel entitled Devil's Tower, which I believe is about Civil War dead coming back to life. So Mark, are we talking about Confederates like those whose statues are we taking down today? Is this book that timely?
Yeah, in fact, actually, I wrote the book back in 1993. But the Confederates make up the bad guys of this novel, which obviously, starting off with people coming back from the dead, it's a kind of a combination of Western history fantasy novel. But yeah, we've got a whole collection from starting with William Quantrill of Confederate characters who make up the bad guys of the novel.
Well, all right there. Well, welcome to Make It Plain. Good to see you. So what part of the country are you in?
I'm in St. Louis. So normally I'd be the one complaining about the heat and humidity this time of year, but I can't today. It was really pleasant in St. Louis. So sorry about that.
How are you all's COVID numbers in St. Louis?
Unfortunately, they're really, Missouri is one of those states that's having not a second wave so much, but as a continuation of that first wave. Missouri has really gone up. I'm actually in the small rural county directly south of St. Louis, and our county only had a couple of hundred cases back in April and May, and now we've got 2,000. So that gives you an idea of the tenfold increase that's happened since then.
You have been pretty much DailyKos's leading correspondent on this pandemic, haven't you?
I happened to start covering it literally the day it began with the announcement from China in the end of December. So between December and May, I wrote over 100 articles about COVID-19. So yeah, it was unfortunately my story. You'd like to be handed a happier story to write about, but that's been my beat for a while.
You said December 2019, so that would be of last year.
Right.
Is that why it's called COVID-19, Mark? Of course, I'm joking.
Yeah, exactly.
In case someone we all mutually know y'all is listening who doesn't know, I don't know why it's called COVID-19.
Where are the other 18 COVIDs? Yes.
Right. So, I love you already, man. This headline, you had a group of Harvard and MIT scientists are snorting an untested COVID-19 vaccine. What's going on there, Mark?
Well, you can have really smart people that do really dumb things. These guys could be completely right. They did some research. They looked back at the two previous coronavirus pandemics that we had, or epidemics, one being SARS and the other one being MERS, and they looked at the research that was done on vaccines at the time. So an effective vaccine for neither of those ever came forward, but the biggest reason was because they were controlled. Those epidemics went away. So the reason there's no SARS vaccine isn't because it's impossible to develop a SARS vaccine. It's because nobody was willing to fund a phase 3 study on a SARS vaccine after it had already really gone out of the population. So these guys lifted a lot of information from those vaccines and they put it together, and they wanted to make this something they could self-administer. So they didn't really want it to be a shot. So instead they came up with a nasal spray. And what they're looking at now is they've got a lot of just proteins and protein fragments that they think will trigger the correct antibody response, and they've put it in a nasal spray. And to avoid too much scrutiny by the FDA, they're not actually distributing the vaccine, they're distributing instructions. So if you happen to be a medical researcher with a lot of access to all of this equipment, you can go in and brew up your own homebrew vaccine and give yourself a shot up the nose of it. And right now, about 70 people apparently have taken this homebrew vaccine.
How will they know whether it works or not? If you
that's the difficulty, with any vaccine. Of course, you can do that phase 1 study with a small group of people, right, to see if it's safe. You can do that phase 2 study to see if it really generates an antibody response. And then you got to do that phase 3 study with thousands of people to see if it's really effective, because you can't, it's unethical to go out and say, now expose yourself to the virus and see if you get sick. And these guys also aren't intentionally exposing themselves to see if they get sick. But the problem with these guys is they didn't do those phase 1 or phase 2 studies either. They don't really even know if this is safe or whether it's building up the antibodies that they think it is.
Mark, can you give us a snapshot of what is going on around the world in terms of developing a vaccine?
I think when Dr. Fauci says that we're still about a year away from the vaccine, that's probably unfortunately true. There are over 200 vaccines in the works, which is an amazing number, and about 80 of those have really moved to some level in the laboratory or in field testing. Around the world, I think about 45 now have reached at least phase 1 testing with human beings. So there's a lot of possibility out there. There's really no reason to think that we can't develop a vaccine for COVID-19. I know we've seen a lot of stories about how people's antibody response dies away, but that's typical. That happens with a lot of diseases. There are actually only 7. There are millions of viruses, but there are actually only 7 coronaviruses that infect people. So 2 of those are SARS and MERS that kill people, are very extreme reactions. 4 of them cause about 15% of what we think of as chest colds. Unfortunately, that 15% that cause chest colds, the antibody response and the immune response does drop very sharply, very quickly. That's why you can catch that same virus again a year later and have another chest cold from the same virus. So, and then there's the SARS-CoV-2 virus behind COVID-19. So the question really all along has been, is it possible to develop lasting immunity against the SARS-CoV-2 virus? It looks actually pretty good in this early research. So I know there's the sensational headlines about how the antibodies drop off, but that's going to happen. That's really not even the important factor. The important factor is that your body remembers how to make those antibodies when they're needed. And so right now there are at least 4 big vaccines in the US and the UK that are pretty far along, moving into that phase 3. And some of those may be available in limited quantities before the end of the year, but not for the general public.
So how many more months are we then away, in the best estimation, when it comes to a vaccine being available for the general public, do you think?
So when you get to around the end of September, you're probably going to see the results from the Oxford vaccine and from the Moderna vaccine in terms of the first results out of their phase 3 trials. And you may actually see in October, as early as October, some limited quantity of vaccine being made available, especially in the UK, to, say, frontline healthcare workers. But really, the first time that you'll probably see any vaccine available in quantity is likely to be the Oxford vaccine. It's likely to be right around the end of the year. That won't be generally available in the United States at that point. So it's probably really looking at more like late February, March, April, before you start to really see a vaccine available to the general public in the U.S.
We've seen a surge here in the United States. Are we still in the first wave, though? Is there still going to be a second wave of COVID? And we're seeing some small spikes coming back in Europe, too, I think.
Yeah, in the Europe, you can probably actually say that they're really in that second wave. But when you look at what has constituted the second wave for these guys, like 100 cases in Hong Kong caused them to go into a real second lockdown, right? But 100 cases is not even what my county managed this week. So it's in the U.S., we never really achieved the level of shutdown that would really justify calling this a second wave. We never locked down long enough and hard enough to break the first wave. We mistook the fact that we hit that little peak and we just kind of got a saddle in the middle of the first wave was all we managed.
So whatever happens from now on, we would then say we're still in our original wave.
Yeah, it's hard at this point to say that we've never gotten it down to the point that those other countries did, where you really thought you had a handle on it and you were case tracing. At this point, it's really impractical to even try to trace the number of cases that we have in the U.S. There's not enough people. If you hired the entire Census Bureau and put them on it, they couldn't trace all of the cases that we have going on right now. So that's why we have no choice but to do big generalized things like lockdowns and like mask mandates, while other countries can get away without those kind of things and get by with very much specific remedies because they've gotten the level of cases down.
Yeah. Are things, Mark, going, well, I mean, are we doing anything to improve the situation generally in the United States, or is this just going to keep getting worse?
We unfortunately, from the beginning, of course, there's been no centralized leadership. That article that Vanity Fair ran last week, which was excellent, and looking at how the national tracking system was both proposed and fell apart, right? You remember back March 13th, Donald Trump stands up in the Rose Garden, has CEOs from 6 big box stores there with him. Here's the guy from Walmart, here's the guy from Walgreens, here's the guy from Target. Between these guys, they've got 32,000 parking lots, and they're going to have drive-through testing all across the nation. And Trump, at that same press conference, Trump says we've got 1,700 engineers at Google building a website that's going to track people. That's the level of effort that was necessary. And if it had been done at that point, if it had been implemented within a couple of weeks of that, we'd be having a really different conversation right now. But that effort didn't happen. And there's a sentence in the middle of that article that is critical, because that sentence says that people within the White House decided not to go forward with that testing because it was politically expedient. They thought it was going to hurt blue states more. So that's the difference between whether or not we're looking at a situation of criminal negligence or genocide through malice. That really deserves to be investigated. If that's true, then the crime committed is enormous.
I tweeted genocide over a week ago.
Yeah.
But to be very honest with you, when someone like me says it, a black activist or whatever, it can be dismissed and somewhat conspiratorial. But when someone like you objectively uses the term genocide, seems to me people can't just dismiss me as being crazy. I mean, what else? Is there another term that we would use if we know that a conscious decision was made to have this just occur in blue states,
Right.
where people who look like me make a big difference in terms of voting?
Yep.
What else do we call it?
It absolutely fits the United Nations definition of genocide, which not only covers intentionally killing people by race or by religion, but also by political party. So if just at the outset, if all you've said is we're going to let states that are democratically controlled suffer and people die because they are democratically controlled, if that was all there was to it right there, and race wasn't even a factor, it would still be genocide. But of course, race is a factor. You know, it just doubles down on it.
Yeah. And I'm not seeing some of these other states. We now know red states are being affected.
Yeah.
But I'm not seeing even them do much to mitigate the situation yet.
Yeah, no, the reluctance of red states to actually take care of their own citizens is astounding, really. And you look at across the South at how Florida and Texas, Arizona behaved as they were becoming the real centers of this pandemic within the United States. And it's amazing the disregard that they had for their own people. And you saw that break at different levels, right? Eventually, Abbott in Texas comes back with a mask mandate. And you can look at what's gone on in Texas. And following that mask mandate, which wasn't universal, it was still on a kind of a county by county basis. But even so, within a couple of weeks, you do see a leveling off of cases in Texas. They were ahead of Florida. They start to drop behind Florida. Those two states had tracked together through the whole pandemic amazingly well. If you graph them together, they're like right together. And then starting about 2 weeks after that mask mandate, they start to move apart. And Florida moves ahead and just keeps getting more ahead, both in terms of number of cases and the rate of deaths. If you look at Arizona, the Ducey out there never put in a statewide mask mandate, but he at least finally stopped preventing county and city officials from putting in a mask mandate. And that seems to be enough to kind of not break the pandemic there, but at least slow the progress, to really give the hospitals there somewhat of a chance to catch up. And then you can look in Florida, where DeSantis has done everything wrong, and the state's paying for it. Right now, it looks like Florida's doing a little bit better, but only because right now Florida has really cut back on testing. As the hurricane has come through Florida, they announced, and they've had several counties now that have done no testing for several days. So you're probably going to see a big surge of cases, a big load of cases, and unfortunately deaths that get reported from Florida over the next week as they sort of catch up to the testing that should have happened this week.
And then there's the school situation, which is frightening. Teachers are frightened. Parents are frightened. You even written about, and as I was saying to you earlier, yesterday we had Mike Espion, who's running for Senate in Mississippi. We talked about what's going on in Mississippi. Mississippi school opened, and then they had to immediately place the students on quarantine. That's going to happen everywhere if a lot of these schools open, right? Exactly.
So you see these. My wife has been a middle school teacher for 27 years, teaches science. So you see these schools, and they plan on you right now. They should be at the point where kids have been given their homeroom assignments. They've had everything planned out. Kids should know their schedules, what they should be getting these letters from teachers. Here's what you need to have your first week of school, right? But instead, schools are stuck in this position where they're getting no guidance from the federal government. They're getting no guidance from the state government. Every school board's being left on its own, and people are positing that as if that's a positive thing, right? They're putting that forward. Oh, we just let the school boards decide. School boards, local school boards, are completely incapable and ill prepared to try to make life and death decisions for thousands of students. They have a hard enough time picking a textbook, and all it takes is a dozen students or a dozen parents to show up at a school board meeting and pound the table and say, let's open those schools, before thousands of students and all those teachers and all their parents and all their families are put at risk. And you see that in situations like Mississippi. People show up at school board meetings, say, I demand we open these schools, and the schools open. It can't be really left at this kind of local level. There has to be, at the very least, some kind of guidelines that say you can't open your school unless you can meet these qualifications, unless in your school district there are fewer than X number of active cases. If there's anything less than that kind of cut and dry requirement, these local school boards will get bullied into open. All it takes is, one or two Donald Trump supporters on the school board, or half a dozen Donald Trump supporters to come marching into the school board meeting, and that school will open and kids will be at risk.
What about, how much have you covered our upcoming elections, or even any of the elections that have occurred this cycle, and COVID, and the impact it will have, the lack of this nation really having an adequate mail-in balloting system? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's I think in some ways the COVID is sort of the deciding factor when you look at the gap between Trump and Biden right now. I mean, there are two factors there that I think have really played into that. If you look back at the civics data, to pump our partner there at Civics, the gap between, the support for Donald Trump was just amazingly rock steady up until this spring. You have a hard time understanding that with the thousands of scandals that have gone by. It seems like a daily scandal, but it has been very steady up until this spring. And then the two things that really seem to have finally decreased Trump's support have been his handling of the pandemic and the protests related to George Floyd's murder. Right, those two things seem to have finally pulled Trump down. And at that point is the point that he is now really singling out vote by mail and saying, we can't do that. The whole scheme, of course, seems to be that Trump wants to be able to say, I won on election day. And you can see that in the polls right now, where most Republicans are saying they're going to get out there and they're going to vote on election day. Most Democrats are saying they want to stay safe. They want to vote by mail. Trump is very aware of that. So he really wants to be able to say, I won on election day. And you already, more than that, polls show that a majority of Republican voters are already saying that if Biden wins because of mail-in ballots, they won't accept the results of the election. I don't know what that means, but that's what the polls are showing.
And so that is very, very dangerous rhetoric. So our elections are jeopardized by COVID. But you've also written about what Russia may be up to again.
Right.
And Richard Blumenthal has tweeted that he has reviewed classified documents. Quote, they are chilling. Declassify this information. Americans deserve and need to know about ongoing foreign interference, even sabotage in our election system. What is, to the best of your knowledge, going on, and what should we be bracing for, Mark?
There's two different portions of this. You're certainly going to have the same kind of things happening in the 2020 cycle that you saw in the 2016 cycle, right? The Russians are really good at exploiting the gaps that exist within the United States. The Russians didn't invent racism, but they're certainly willing to take advantage of racism in trying to forward those schisms in the country. And they're very capable of looking at all of the fractures that are already existing, and they just put a lever in there and try to pull it apart. But the other thing that's going to go on top of that this year, the replacement for but her emails, is what's going on with Yugoslavia, where you've got pro-Russian officials in Yugoslavia, or in Ukraine, I'm sorry, pro-Russian officials in Ukraine that are feeding data back supposedly about Joe Biden. And you've got the long-running investigation that's been headed by John Durham and William Barr, and we've seen nothing from that. In congressional testimony, when Barr was asked about it, he would not promise that we won't see it before the election, which is pretty much a promise that we will see it before the election. And then you see a lot of Republican officials have been handed this packet, and packet is even a generous word, because the part of it that came from the State Department was 1,600 pages. So Republicans in the Senate and the House are sitting on at least 1,600 pages worth of information that supposedly arms them with scandals about Joe Biden that we haven't seen yet. No, they haven't released it to Democrats. We don't know what's in it. So it's very hard to fight these charges when nobody even knows what's in them yet. And so you would expect that there is going to be both a continuation of the same kind of things that happened last time, where Russia is going to be planting false stories. They're going to be, sending emails, and they're going to be using advertisements through social media that are designed to already exacerbate, the gaps that are already there. And then you're going to see on top of that a kind of an October surprise based around this false information that's being passed along from Ukraine.
Okay, so we're in for it. Wow. Mark Sumner, folks, of DailyKos. What's your next piece you're working on? Give us a tease. What's
I've been writing this past week about how a lot of the things that we think of as different stories, right? School reopening, the hydroxychloroquine, the cutting unemployment, all of that seems like it's multiple stories, but it's all really one story. And a lot of that story is about how Republicans are really focused on pushing people back into work. The people that we call essential workers, who are disproportionately Black and brown workers, are being pushed out there, put into danger, because their work doesn't generate their profit. Their work generates profits for the guys at the top. So that's why, Republicans, when they put out this package last week of their supposed deal, which it took some military spending and a new FBI building to even get enough Republicans on board to agree to this deal. But there are two things that all the Republicans are dead set about on this that they won't drop. And one of those is that you can't sue your employer for reopening a company, and the other is to cut the unemployment benefits. So they're saying, we're going to cut your unemployment benefits, so you have to go out there and work. And when you go out there and work, if the conditions are unsafe, you can't sue your employer. And those are the two things that were the foundation of the plan that the Republicans are putting forth. And now on top of that, they've been doing this big ad blitz on hydroxychloroquine, which is really nothing more than trying to convince people that it is somehow safe to get out there. If you get sick, take this, you'll be okay. But of course, it's ineffective. It has no positive benefit against COVID-19.
Isn't it interesting that he can pronounce hydroxychloroquine and can't pronounce Yosemite?
Yeah.
You're not Jewish, are you?
No.
Say Yosemite. That's what we.
Yosemite. Yes. But yeah, well, that phrase might be running through his head already. So.
Hello. That's right. Mark Sumner, folks. Devil's Tower at DailyKos.com. Check him out. First time with us here on Make It Plain for Thursday Coats, and it will not be the last, I'm sure. Mark, thank you, buddy.
All right, thanks very much for having me on. Hopefully Marcos didn't get blown away by the hurricane.
Yeah, hope not.
God, you are our refuge. Send our ancestors to guard our doors. Cast out this virus from our communities and our bodies. Heal, bless, and protect everyone listening and their loved ones. Thank you for listening to Make It Plain and Get Woke. Remember to listen, like, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. If all minds are clear, it has been made plain.